Paganism was not a religion. It was an entire way of seeing and interacting with reality. So this is not a film about one religion versus another. This is a film about something much, much older. This is a film about seeing things and how we all became so disenchanted.
Limitours. This time,
in English literature, there are few greater expressions of the indignation of the fate of pagan deities, spirits, fairies, elves, than Chaucer's Wife of Bath's scathing rhetoric. She tells of pre-Christian times when fairies were everywhere. But then the Limitours came. The Limitours were church friars who went up and down the land, blessing everything from homes and buildings to woods and streams. The fairies were scoured from the land. So began the Great Disenchantment. Max Weber referred to this as the disenchantment of the world. We often associate the advent of materialism with the Enlightenment, but arguably there was an earlier intermediate phase. The pagan religions were not just polytheistic, they were cosmotheistic. Everything in the world was considered to have its own spirit or deity. With the coming monotheistic religions, such as Christianity, they were reduced to mere materialistic entities with no assigned deity.
Hey, what's this?
The Tale of the Limitours is a retelling of a much older story from Plutarch's The Decline and Cessation of Oracles. An Egyptian mariner named Thamos hears a strange voice telling him to shout, "The great Pan is dead," as his ship approaches the Pallades. On doing so, the whole island erupts with the sound of wailing mourners lamenting the passing of the great Pan. Although the tale of Thamos and Pan is now thought to be a mistranslation, the early church seized upon it as a triumph of Christianity and the disempowering of pagan gods. This well suited the Christian narrative. As it turned out, the pagan gods were not quite so easy to scour from the popular imagination of the people. Aleida Assman arguably the principal founder of the field of cultural memory, outlines the three principal forms of discourse in which pagan deities continue to live to this day, namely folklorisation, fictionalisation, and demonisation. After Christianity saw the demise of polytheistic religions, fairies, elves, and any number of folkloric creations are what remained as occult survivors. But now they were banished to remote or liminal places. Out there somewhere, in the corner of your eye, may be real, or perhaps you're just seeing things. From the point of view of a Christian society, they were safely devalued as being mere superstitions of the folk. Folklore, however, despite its diminished status, functioned as a remarkable vessel for the transmission of unofficial tradition, and eventually would find advocates in higher society, notably the Romantics. Heinrich Heine, a prominent 19th century poet, journalist, and literary critic, is an interesting figure to me, not only because of his folkloric efforts to document the cosmotheistic spirits, but the fact that he was a well-known advocate of something known as feuilleton. My apologies to French-speaking people for butchering the pronunciation. Feuilleton was a lightweight trivia section of a newspaper, like gossip columns or theatre reviews. What might be called today the popular press, nothing serious or highbrow. But it had a serious purpose. It was openly used to bypass government censorship in the Napoleonic era. Political opinion and discussion could be disguised as art criticism or short fictional stories. Heine adopted this method after moving to Paris in 1831, where he wrote harsh criticism of Germany and Prussian repression for German newspapers, avoiding the censor by appearing non-serious or frivolous. The connection with his advocacy of folklore is clear. He had directly preserved and popularized German folkloric knowledge, and he saw it was a form that evaded Christian censorship and knew the power that something could have even when presented as devalued knowledge of the unsophisticated folk. Politicians, rulers, and despots, they come and they go. But somehow, folklore and myths never leave us, almost as if maybe, just maybe, they are us. Although Jacques Vallee was the scientist who inspired Spielberg's Close Encounters, Vallee did not believe that the evidence supported the extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis. Instead, he observed the high correlation with folklore and posited an interdimensional visitation hypothesis where individuals projected their own worldview and culture onto their experiences. Essentially, what Vallee was saying was alien visitations were the equivalent of experiences of apparitions documented in folklore, but seen through modern eyes. I think there's something much more to the enduring popularity of Shakespeare than just, oh, he was a great writer who explored every facet of human nature. Under the guise of fictionalisation, the devalued knowledge of the unsophisticated folk found a route to social mobility and made a return to high culture. Within fictional frameworks, the social norms of the time could be safely ignored, and pagan and occult entities given free rein. The Catholic Church, like all successful empire-building entities, had pragmatic strategies when it came to dealing with the deeply entrenched beliefs of those it presided over. It didn't just simply try to eradicate them. In establishing the doctrine of Purgatory, it harnessed and exploited the needs of the living to commune with the dead, just as pagan cultures had revered their ancestors for millennia. It was both a societal and a private, intimate need. So when the Protestant prohibitions and English authorities' clampdowns on purgatory came into effect, the need did not go away. In particular, reports of ghost sightings did not abate. Stephen Greenblatt states in his book, Hamlet in Purgatory, Shakespeare grasped that there were powerful links between his art and the haunting of spirits. And if there was one man in Renaissance theatre who stepped in to fill this need for ghosts and all the spectres of a pagan past, it was Shakespeare. There is a common phrase which is still in widespread use and used when something of high strangeness occurs. Your grandmother could be chatting to her neighbour, telling her, "You know, I saw my Frank last night," Frank being her dead husband. "He was at the bottom of the stairs and he was calling to me." Inevitably, her neighbour would give a contemplative look before proclaiming, "Well, Peggy, there are more things in heaven and earth, they would only ever say the first half of the phrase, the second half hanging silently in the air, seemingly not needing to be said, because it was already inhabited the collective unconscious. The full phrase, of course, is from Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. Such is the impact of Shakespeare's Hamlet, in which he arguably created literature's most famous ghost. But why? Because this play fulfilled those needs for the banished purgatorial rites. In 1817, Coleridge coined the phrase suspension of disbelief. It's a phrase most people have heard of if they've taken an English literature class or maybe even film school. It just simply means that for the time you're reading a book or watching a film, you have to suspend your disbelief and believe that what you're looking at or reading is real. Whilst using supernatural elements in his work, he wanted them not to be mere childish fantasy, but allow the reader to see and feel deep human truths that could not perhaps be conveyed literally. Coleridge understood the distinction between imagination and mere fantasy, and that it could contain something that was real. But what do we mean by truth exactly? And why would Shakespeare's use of supernatural entities that embodied pagan beliefs resonate with people so strongly? Well, if paganism was not, as I believe, a religion, but a way of seeing and interacting with the world that was co-evolved, that enabled them not only to survive, but to be the most successful living creature on Earth, going beyond mere survival, creating great civilizations and technological feats that are still impressive today, then paganism was indeed a deep human truth in a very real and substantive way. This wasn't just suspension of disbelief. This was reactivation of belief that already existed. The works of Shakespeare resonated deeply with a lost cultural memory that was still there on the tip of the tongue. If Shakespeare was something of an evangelizer for pagan entities, Milton was definitely a demonizer. Milton saw nature as haunted or possessed by cosmotheistic spirits and therefore in need of some form of exorcism. Have you ever wondered why many Christians conflate paganism with evil or devil worship? Well, unlike folklorisation, which devalued knowledge as mere superstition, or fictionalisation, which gave free rein under the guise of entertainment, demonisation does something entirely different. Instead of denying the existence of cosmotheistic deities, it accepts them as real and fully integrates them into the Christian worldview. It grants them full power and authority, but it does so as the great opposer under the all-encompassing concept we know today as Satan. The pagan entities are negated rather than just eliminated, and this negation reframes them as a dangerous and threatening force that people should fear. Aleida Assman refers to this as normative inversion. Having a great opposer is, of course, very useful to any movement, as it unites people in opposition to the ever-present threat of the enemy. But there is another profound effect in reinforcing a psychology that was very different to a pagan world where you have a plurality of deities. It created polarization with a black and white mindset and rigid thinking. Although the Catholic Church continued this plurality to a certain extent with its reverence for saints, over time this too was a practice that was suppressed by the Protestant Church. Under demonisation, we do still see a method of survival for pagan deities. It turns out the rumours of Pan's death were much overstated, as you'll see him even today as a popular figure, as he's used for the prototype of the devil with his horns and cloven hooves. But demonisation was arguably one of the most successful strategies used by the Church for the suppression of paganism, because not only did it create fear around these deities, even last year, in 2025, we had prominent political figures in both the UK and the US directly attribute the evils of the world to paganism. The overarching principle of folklorisation, fictionalisation, demonisation was not one of elimination. In effect, it ensured that in cultural memory, paganism was lost in translation. a way of thinking and seeing that was essentially instinctual, could no longer interpret its own insights. Today, New Age paganism continues this lost in translation method and undermines our survival instincts. It promotes degrowth climate change agendas and advocates for misguided net zero policies. Paganism is continuously described as a nature religion. But nature is narrowly and disingenuously defined as just green stuff and wildlife going for a walk in the woods or the field. But to our ancestors, nature meant the entire cosmos and all the invisible forces, from where we would eventually get natural philosophy, which in time would become what we call today science. The New Age portrays paganism as primitive and anti-science. But if you look at our ancestors' achievements, it was anything but. Even if they didn't have the language of science that we would recognise today. We cannot ration our way out of a crisis as climate change activists would have us believe. We've never operated in that way. But on a positive note, I'll end where I came in. Paganism is not a religion, it's an origin story. And we have a great shot at long-term survival. We all come from that common root, whatever religion or none that we belong to. And fortunately for us, history has shown we are all really, really good at seeing things.